Hello and welcome to this interview for Host City with Paul Bush, the Director of Events at Visit Scotland. Host City 2020 takes place on the 8th to 9th of December, supported by Event Scotland. So thank you, Event Scotland, for your support. The conference theme is the Big Restart, Recovery with a Purpose for the Digital Age. How is Event Scotland supporting the recovery of the events sector, Paul, through this crisis?
Well, thanks very much for this opportunity, Ben, to speak to you. And first of all, I'd like to say how delighted we are to be supporting Host City again in Glasgow and Scotland this December. Obviously, the new norm is digital events, and certainly the digital conferences have been extremely successful. But I guess for most of us in the events industry, this has been a great time for change. It's been a time for reflection as well. And probably lots of good has come out of some challenging times as well. So in Scotland specifically, we had a range of forums in the April-May period with something like 250 of the key people within the industry and events sector. This told us that we probably needed to pull together a group that could talk to government. So we established what we called the Events Industry Advisory Group, which has 17 of the key people across various genres within the events industry in Scotland, and they've met on 10 occasions now. It's chaired by Peter Duffy, who's the Chief Executive of the Scottish Exhibition Campus, a really powerful group with people like Jeff Ellis from DF Events, Julia Moore from Edinburgh Festivals, Johnny Cole Hamilton, the Executive Director at the RNA, and football and rugby. But also we've got the net wide and far in Scotland in terms of we've got the director of the Hebkelt Festival in Stornoway on the group. And this has allowed us to talk to our Cabinet Secretary about concerns about funding, but also about how the industry can recover over the next, I guess, 3, 6, 9, 12 months. We've had 2 funding initiatives. The first one was particularly focused around the event supply chain, where we were very conscious that particularly freelancers and self-employed people had been left out of a lot of government support. And in the last week, we've just announced a Scottish Events Recovery Fund, where we're hoping to really target community events, because I think community events will be important in the future, but also our general, what we'd call our national events program in the past, to give people the confidence to go back to events, but also to engage with the supply chain and start to get the industry moving. And obviously everyone was delighted with the news that a potential vaccine is not far around the corner. So I think the announcement of a Scottish Events Recovery Fund this week has been very timely.
Absolutely. And when we talk about hosting with a purpose, the theme of the conference this year, what do you think event hosts and event organisers perhaps need to do to better communicate the value of hosting major events at a time like this?
Well, I think, our focus will still very much be ultimately on the international events program, but looking at communities and regions will also be equally as important and critical. I don't just think for the short term, but the long term. So whether that be in a community in terms of a community event or an international event, we need to ensure that we can articulate and demonstrate the value and benefits of events. And I think that we've seen a move around the world over the last probably 12, 18, 24 months where policy direction and impacts have become even more critical rather than just the traditional people in hotel bed nights, gross value added, and in fact employment. So can the events have an impact within the social fabric of the society where they're being hosted? Can they have an impact on some of the gender and diversity and equity issues? And can they have a specific impact maybe on that local economy, which wouldn't be in place without the event taking place itself? So it's about being a bit smarter, it's being a bit cleverer, but also ensuring that we communicate those benefits really clearly to the wider community once they've been delivered and they're in place.
You mentioned diversity and inclusion there, and that's something which has really sort of risen on the agenda over the last, well, particularly this year, but over recent years. How is this being reflected in Scotland's event hosting landscape?
Well, we've had a period of probably the last 3 or 4 years where we've had a very rich and diverse events portfolio. Things like the Homeless World Cup was held in Glasgow in 2016. the IPC Swimming World Championships in Glasgow in 2015. And last year, in fact, we had Scotland's Summer of Women's Sport, where we had 6 major events across a period of time, culminating in the Solheim Cup at Gleneagles in 2019 in September, where we very much looked at the whole aspects of diversity and inclusion. And particularly for something like the Solheim Cup, it gave us a real catalyst and platform to provide Scottish golf with that momentum to really encourage more women into clubs, more women onto committees in clubs, more families playing together. And of course, it culminated with, a very special Solheim Cup with Europe retaining the trophy with Katrina Matthew. But, for the first time ever, I think at a golf event, we saw mums and dads with prams and buggies on a golf course. Now, 2 or 3 years ago, that would be considered quite an alien subject matter. But, the appropriate measures were put in place. There was fantastic facilities for young people. But also in terms of the disabled population, we had viewing pens on each of the holes where they actually had the prime locations. So they weren't put behind the back. They were front and center of mind in terms of both the planning and delivery.
Interesting. And the other thing which has become more and more important over the years is the issue of sustainability, of course. And major events, what role can major events play in the transition towards a more sustainable future, do you think, from a Scotland point of view?
Well, I think major events have got a key role to play within the sustainability and environment debate. I mean, counterintuitively, events by definition don't really fit the sustainability agenda because people travel and fly around the world. But, some of the recycling methods, looking at the way food and drink wastage is recycled at events, the use of plastics, particularly the use of technology, so there's less paper used on site. And our golf events have shown a really good sustainable practices, particularly around things like, water on courses, so that we don't use plastic bottles. We didn't use a plastic bottle at all at the men's and women's Scottish Open this year. And with the help of Scottish Water, we managed to put water recharging points all around the course for spectators. And of course, the Year of Coast and Waters, which was due to be held this year and is sort of moving into 2021 as we speak, we'll also see the opportunity to utilise that great natural platform that Scotland has in terms of its coasts and its beaches and waterways. And I think for me, one of the really important things for Scotland and probably the events world will be COP26, which is being held in Glasgow in November 2021. And I'm quite keen that we use that as a vehicle to actually get the events message across in terms of what it can do for the world.
Absolutely. And when events like this are so high profile, there's an opportunity to really lead by example as well, and people can sort of follow the lead of athletes and people on these events. The other thing that's happened this year is on a massive scale is digitalization. We've seen a quite a massive acceleration towards people using digital platforms like this on one level, but on another level, the hosting of major events is sort of entering the virtual realm to varying degrees. How do you see the transition to digital playing out in the future of major events, Paul? I mean, what's happening here in terms of real world events and the future of how we interface with content?
Well, I think there's some events where you can't get away from live propositions, particularly, whether that be a live music event, a AAA artist that's coming into your country or your venue. I think events, things like the Ryder Cup, you do get a great experience on television, but it's not the same as live. But there are some genres, there are some niches within the events industry that have really capitalized on the opportunity for digital hybrid types events, things like book festivals in particular, certain niche music events, particularly some of the folk festivals we've had around Scotland. And I noticed only last week one of the first events that's going to be in our Scotland's Events Recovery Fund will be held in the islands. And that will be streamed throughout, the world for people to access it. So I think there's a definite place for digital events. I think you will see people like the Edinburgh International Book Festival run parallel streams in the future. So you'll have a live event and you'll have a digital online event, particularly for international visitors that can't travel. One of the tricks of the trade will be how they monetize them. You know, how do they gain any financial security from the digital platforms? And of course, over the last 8 or 9 months, we've seen technology improve out of all proportion. I guess, you know, early March, we were all scrabbling around thinking, well, what is Teams? What is Zoom? You know, what is Blue Jeans and all those different platforms? But, you know, they've become second nature now. So I think it has changed the way we operate. I think people will work in a much more agile, flexible way around the world. And the events industry needs to continue to respond to that. So despite the great challenges, I think there are also great opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you highlight one major opportunity is the increased reach. And for Host City this year, it's fantastic that we're hosting the event from Glasgow, from Scotland, and but actually broadcasting it to a much bigger audience than ever before. I mean, we got 350 people to the conference last year in Glasgow, which is brilliant. But it's going to be more like 1,000 people watching this year on the virtual platform, which is great. And really looking forward to hearing you speak there, Paul.
Thanks. And I mean, you know, I think the program we've got this year is equally as good as any other year, and arguably better. And in a strange way, you've managed to attract some real high caliber speakers, probably because it's a digital platform. So rather than actually having to travel to Glasgow, they can give up, you know, 15, 20 minutes time to do a piece like this, rather than coming into a live forum. So I think in future we'll have a combination of both. But I'm looking forward to December, and I think it'll be another highly successful event.
Great. Well, thanks very much again, Paul, for your time. Great to chat to you today, and look forward to hearing you speak at Host City on the 8th and 9th of December. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ben.